Hello, Ivy here. This week's podcast is entitled The Power Trap: Why the Elite Stay Rich and You Struggle. SGUK episode 149. Ever wonder how the rich stay rich while the rest struggle? In this podcast, we dive into the hidden world of the elite, how they manipulate power, control wealth, and avoid consequences. But what are the risks? And can the system ever change? The heart of this article and this podcast will be able to look at how the global elite, monarchy, and old money maintain influence while remaining insulated from societal issues. The main themes of the article and the podcast relate to privilege, influence, and the reluctance to change existing power structures. How do elites maintain their status? What about consequences? What are the risks, if any? i.e., social stratification, resistance to change. Mental health is one of the 5 areas that the SGUK podcast channel has on all its branding. So in that respect, what are the psychological effects of privilege and isolation? What about the children? Inheriting privilege and responsibility with very limited competence where it is needed, but surrounded by yes people 24/7, telling them that they are the best things since sliced bread. How to encourage accountability and engagement among the elite. My main focus in my podcasts and articles is about those who escape from monarchy families, some of whom operate like a cult. Globally, our world is moving in a worrying direction. A world increasingly controlled by elites. Without competence, but a hunger for power and control. Let us break it down into sizable chunks of discussion points and hopefully thought-provoking analysis in our quieter moments. A few questions to set the mind thinking and subsequently questioning a few concerns around a few topics or situations. Did you know that most billionaires today pass down their wealth tax-free, while the average person struggles with cost of living crises? We live in a world where power isn't earned, it's inherited. And the people inheriting it often lack competence, but hold influence over policies that affect you and I. What happens when people born into wealth live their entire lives surrounded by yes men and women and never face real-world struggles? How the elite stay insulated. 3 areas come to mind: old money and monarchy, inherited power, and how birthright still determines global influence. Media control, billionaire-owned media and controlled narratives. Wealth hoarding, trust funds, tax loopholes, and avoiding financial accountability. The psychological toll of privilege. Mental health and isolation. The loneliness of privilege and being surrounded by yes people. Children of the elite. Born into power, but often unprepared of how to handle it. The bubble effect. When wealth and privilege make elites completely disconnected from real-world issues. Let me say here, just going by the last two sections and the bullet points that I've read out, in the article that accompanies this podcast, and for any new listeners, there is an article that's done every week following the podcast, and it's on my website, and I give out the direct link to it when I've uploaded the article, and I put it on to YouTube with the link for you to click if you want to know more. And the reason I'm mentioning that, apart from anything else, every article that I produce, I list the majority, not all of them sometimes because of just the sheer numbers, but I list reference sources that I have used to find out some of the information that I quote in the articles. So by giving you a selection of those, if you wish to know more about any of the topics raised, you will have links that will start you off on that process. And in terms of some of the sections that I read out and mention and talk about in this podcast, some of the bullet points are because of the information behind each bullet point is so detailed, but I think very, very interesting and applicable as things are going at the moment politically in a variety of countries around the globe. And it means that you will know that by me listing some of these bullet points and giving a few lines about each one, that there will be enough within the reference sources listed at the end of the article to put you on the road to finding out more about all of them. So it's not that I'm just rushing through them, it's giving you an overview of some of the areas that relate to the topic in hand. And if you wish to know more, you will find enough direct links on various websites as to where these phrases are coming from and what they are trying to say. Risks of elite rule and resistance to change. Social stratification. The wider the gap, the more resentment builds. Lack of consequences. Why elites rarely face justice. And in brackets some examples: Epstein, corporate fraud, financial crimes. Resistance movements. Are we seeing a rise in anti-elite sentiment? How can the elite be held accountable? Solutions for change. What policy changes, activism, and awareness can do? Escaping the system. Examples of royals and elites from various parts of the world who broke free. Final thoughts. The world is becoming more controlled by an incompetent elite. What will happen if things don't change? On a separate but linked podcast channel, I'm working on a small book relating to the Windrush scandal, and I have set up 12 monthly podcasts to run until January 2026. Different subject matter, but there are similarities around power and the powerless, or at best, way less power than the elite group that controlled their destiny. Windrush and systemic injustice, this new podcast on Windrush is an incredibly powerful direction. The way the UK government erased lives and histories with one bureaucratic act is exactly the kind of systemic injustice that aligns with the broader themes, which is power versus the powerless, state control, erasure, and justice denied, that are being discussed in this other podcast channel. This means that the future topics from both podcasts could interconnect on this area of concern. Elites and data control. How governments and the wealthy manipulate data and history to erase, suppress, and maintain power. Windrush is just one example. The psychological toll of being erased. The mental health impact on those affected by elite-controlled policies. For example, Windrush victims, displaced communities, exiles. Who holds the power? How institutions, royalty, politicians, wealthy families, just 3 examples there, continue to operate above consequence, even as people suffer. Have you ever wondered why the elite never face consequences? It is not just about money. It is about power. The rich don't just get lucky. They've built a system designed to keep them at the top, while the rest of us struggle. Loopholes, tax havens, and inherited influence mean they stay in control without accountability. Think of current events around the world, some of which are referred to in this podcast, and one could easily imagine it was written yesterday. Another of the reference sources listed is one from the Financial Times. I can't quote from the article because the Financial Times do not allow it to be quoted in any other publication without payment. But I really do hope that you look it up for yourselves, because the whole article is there. Some of it, having said the whole article, some of it is there, quite a bit of the article itself, a lot of it in fact, but there is an amount that's behind a paywall. Regardless of whether it's a bit that's been published or behind the paywall, I'm not allowed to quote it in any other publication, hence it can't appear in the podcast or in the article that will accompany it. However, having read it, because it was in the published part of the article, I have summarised, in my own words, one of the areas that I found of particular interest. And if you do access the web link and look at the article, even if it's a section that's been made public, it's quite a lot that's there. And I found it very, very interesting, and it was applicable to a number of situations in different, on different continents and in different nations where I could see it resonated. So, the article explains that an unspoken agreement exists between societal elites and citizens, where elites enjoy power and privileges while providing security and prosperity to the people. When elites fail to deliver their end of the bargain, they risk replacement. a process that occurs relatively smoothly in democracies, but tends to be prolonged and violent in authoritarian systems. So hopefully, my summary gives you an idea of what this much longer paragraph within that article by the Financial Times discusses. I found it very, very interesting because I could think of a number of elected officials in various countries, two in particular, in the Western Hemisphere, that I could see this applied to immediately. You may think of those two as well. You may think of others as well as those two. But those two came to mind because they're in the news a lot. Elites, the perennial rulers, and their failures. Elites have always ruled societies, but their success often depends on how well they serve the public good. Are today's elites leading or merely preserving their own privileges? One of the articles listed in the reference sources explores why elites fail and why we'll always need them, and how to hold them accountable. The word elite comes from the Latin eligere, meaning to choose. Historically, elites were seen as the chosen few, those selected to lead because of their wisdom, bravery, or skill. Fast forward a few thousand years, and the concept has evolved into something far less flattering. Today, elites are often viewed not as the chosen, but as the self-appointed. A group more concerned with preserving their own power than fulfilling their responsibilities to society. But for all their importance, elites have a bad habit of losing their way. Time and again, they become insular, self-serving, and disconnected from the people they're supposed to lead. The failure of elites to serve the public isn't a new story. History shows us that elites, left unchecked, often succumb to the same predictable pitfalls. Installation and groupthink. Elites often exist in echo chambers, surrounded by people who think and act like them. This fosters a culture of groupthink, where dissenting ideas are dismissed and self-serving decisions are justified as necessary or rational. I'd like to add here that I think the above paragraph, those few lines, can easily describe a few groups around the globe who are behaving exactly like this, and some of them are not as far away as one might think. Did you know the term groupthink was coined in the 20th century by psychologist Irving Janis, but the concept is much, much older. Plato warned about the dangers of elite delusions in his Republic, arguing that rulers who grew too detached from the people become blind to reality. The accountability deficit. Many elites operate in systems where failure carries few consequences. Politicians who bungle major policies often land cushy think tank jobs. CEOs who tank companies walk away with millions in severance. Without meaningful accountability, there's little incentive to prioritise public good over personal gain. In the words of the great American economist Thomas Sowell, it is hard to imagine a more stupid or more dangerous way of making decisions than by putting those decisions in the hands of people who pay no price for being wrong. Very factual words in those last sentence. Very thought-provoking too. Economic elites gain power by amassing wealth, acquiring ownership stakes in key industries, and influencing policies that affect the global economy. Through their wealth, they have the ability to shape public opinion, influence elections, and lobby for favourable regulations. I think those lines are worthy of repeat. Economic elites gain power by amassing wealth, acquiring ownership stakes in key industries, and influencing policies that affect the global economy. Through their wealth, they have the ability to shape public opinion, influence elections, and lobby for favourable regulations. They also control vast networks of capital that allow them to exert pressure on both politicians and ordinary citizens. In this sense, economic elites often intersect with ruling elites, as political decisions are often made with their economic interests in mind. I think there is no need for me to say any more on the words that refer to political decisions are often made with their economic interests in mind. Talking about the elite here, I think everyone knows what that means. And each of us could have maybe different ideas of different nations, different groups of people who are operating in that way. But the fact remains, it's just not one or two. It's happening around the world in increasing numbers, and that in itself is a worrying trend. I need to say nothing further on that score, other than to say there are a few nations who claim to be democracies, but are currently behaving like something else. Those who appear to be the faces of power and in control by designation of title are not really working for or speaking to the general masses of the population. Those elected officials are answering to an unseen group of people, and those officials out front are mere puppets who believe that they will be okay as long as they do as expected. They are in for a rude awakening. I can think of at least two nations in the Western Hemisphere who, I am convinced, fit this arrangement. I don't believe that I am mistaken. It is evident to me that there are officials who are trying to carve out the safest niche that they consider will benefit them in the long run. The fact that there are increasing numbers of nations who are at different points in the process regarding the places on the rung of the ladder of elites, and the connection between them and leaders of industry and business groups, cloaked in secrecy or pretending to be involved in a random area of corporate business, but who clearly liaise with the influential elites. Between them, they pose a danger to society as we know it. The signs are there. It is happening. I include monarchies in that group, in particular the groupthink description earlier. I will end this podcast with a repeat of a few lines mentioned earlier regarding groupthink and the risk of certain outcomes dependent upon how the cards are made to fall. This is the quote I am repeating. Elites often exist in echo chambers, surrounded by people who think and act like them. This fosters a culture of groupthink where dissenting ideas are dismissed and self-serving decisions are justified as necessary or rational. That above paragraph can easily describe a few groups around the globe who are behaving exactly like this, and some of them are not as far away as one might think. That's the end of this week's podcast. The podcast will become published at 8 o'clock as usual on Sunday night on the 9th of March. It won't disappear after the podcast ends. It will be on that YouTube channel forevermore. It just means that it remains private until 8. 8 it will become public. So if you are unable to make it to view or to listen at 8 o'clock, don't worry. It will be there for the rest of the evening and for days and weeks and months to come. We try and do a weekly podcast here on Sussex Global UK, and we hope that you find the content of the channel of interest. And if you do, please subscribe and definitely pay us a visit, and also definitely leave comments and questions that you may have, and I will respond to them. So, I look forward to reading your comments, and if you have questions, for you to pose questions, and I will respond to them the following week and see how we go. For those of you that have been following this channel for the last 3 or 4 years, you know that at the heart of it has been the British royal family and their treatment of anyone who wishes to leave. I'll leave it at that in terms of a description. But what this channel doesn't do, and that's not to say that what others do is incorrect, it's just not of interest to me. I don't do the day-to-day tabloid-esque type of coverage of the behaviour and antics of those involved. They don't interest me. In fact, none of the monarchies around the world interest me enough to talk about them every week. I really do not care. What I like to do is to stand back from any activity, whether it be the royal family or any other group of people out there that is going through some kind of difficulty, trauma, however you want to describe it. I, on this channel, focus on 5 areas, and that's what all of the podcasts will contain and cover, one or more of those 5. And you'll see those in the branding, you'll see it on the slides, so you'll have a reminder. And I said one of them was mental health. There are legal things, there are to do with hate online. I said there are 5. And that's what I focus on. I don't focus on their daily arguments. I don't focus on media, particularly UK media, because all of that, even what used to be respected publications, are now simply tabloids, and it's gossip, and it brings in advertising revenue. It doesn't matter whether it's fact. They just sort of write about things that just don't interest me, and I don't have interest in, and have never had interest in, any of the monarchy families. The only person that came to my attention and really sort of maintained that was Princess Diana, and now one of her sons. The rest, not interested. So if you're interested into the royal things, this is not the channel for you. But other than that, I'm hoping that you will find lots of things that are of interest, and there are playlists on the account, on Sussex Global UK's account, listed by year, and you will see all the topics that we have covered over that time. And there is, as a result of that, a publication that is due to be published in the coming months. It's finished, it's going through editorial checks now, based on a variety of activities, particularly of people who have left and who have set up a new life elsewhere. And it's not only the UK royal family that have done that, others have also escaped from their own royal family. But we look at psychological issues, and majority of the articles that you will see contain academic models and academic research papers, on the basis that when people come forward to challenge, it's always very, very useful to have, one, receipts about things that they deny that took place, but also academia over time has covered a number of psychological issues, developments, however you want to call it, that is very useful to be able to quote, where people have spent time researching and going through what has happened and the evidence and therefore the outcomes, and to map that across to modern day behaviour and outcomes for some people who are no longer here, and others who are still suffering as a result of being on the receiving end of certain types of negative and dangerous behaviour. So if you want to get to know more about the channel, for those who are new and listening to this podcast, look at the playlist and just take your pick. It doesn't really matter which ones. Go through that and see what you think about the findings. And all of them, or 99% of them, will have reference sources for you to follow up if you so wish. And just know that there is a publication coming out, a book, a very hefty book. It might be 3 at the moment, 3, a box set, or I will have to drastically reduce what's there. We'll see when the editorial checks are finished. But that is a very valuable piece of work, and it reflects, or it will reflect for future generations, history, but it also includes and encompasses a variety of academics on a range of subjects, particularly the 5 that this channel focuses on, and I think it adds and will add to the knowledge that's already out there. In a nutshell, in those sort of 5 minutes, I've tried to explain the background of the channel to any new listeners that are joining us now, and I hope that you enjoyed and found of interest what we said today, and I hope that we see you again in the future. We have a nice little community going here, and we would welcome more for you to enjoy the discussions that we have and the banter that we have. So, as I said, I look forward to reading your comments. Oh, for the new people, the comment section is moderated to the point that where people who seem to have great fun on YouTube in particular, on a number of channels, not just mine, that like to put in offensive, disgusting, vile comments, not just for banter, really, really evil things, their comments won't appear. So if you write something and you don't see it suddenly appear on the comments section of the public facing bit of the account, it just means that I've not got round to it yet. It might be an hour or two depending on the time of day, the different changes in time zones because of the countries and people that are listening and watching. So if it's during the night for me here in the UK, you might not see it for about 6 to 8 hours, and then a lot of them will appear at once. So don't worry about that. But that was proven to be very necessary in the early days of the channel, because I was naive to think that people didn't put such things, but I soon found out. So no comments that people put in will immediately appear on the public facing. I check them if they are offensive and all the other things that go with that. They don't appear, but just so you know, and you can tell others if they inquire, I don't get rid of them either, because some of them are really sick, really evil, and I've promised them all, and I 100% mean it, that in a number of ways in the future, all of them, their names will be in the lights, and it doesn't matter what their username is. That does not hide their true identity and location. So they can all sit back and wait for that day to come, because it will come one day. So, speak to you all in the comments, and other than that, it's bye from me, bye from Ivy, bye.
Always make you smile, always make you smile. Always make you smile, always make you smile. Always make you smile, always make you smile. Always make you smile, always make you smile.